So this is my neck, and as you can see here, this is my stitch line. So I've marked in my stitch line just around the V, because what we're going to do now is we're going to stitch a reinforcing stitch. So I'm going to do that now. So you need to make special care that you go straight down to the point and keep it on the point. So to pivot the material round, all you need to do is lift the foot up, rotate your material back round with your needle in, and then back down. So the idea is that you're reinforcing this with a smaller stitch that you would usually use, but not too small in case you need to unpick it. So I usually sew at a 2.5, so I've just brought it down to just under 2. So I'm going to carry on stitching that, and then I'll show you it at the end. So here's the reinforcing stitch. Follow the stitch line right down to the V and back up. See, this is the really important bit, because the next stage is I'm going to cut straight into it from this point straight down to this point. So that's why this point has to be in exactly the right place, because that's going to determine whether your neckband is wonky or not. So I'm going to try and cut while I'm using the phone, which might go disastrously wrong, but here goes nothing. So I'm cutting in right down to the point. Yeah, I'm happy with that. It's gone all the way. So now I'm going to pin the band. So on the neckband, I've marked my seam allowance to then match it up to my seam allowance on here. So I've cut into my neck, and then I've marked on the front of the band where my stitch line will be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and line these up first. So this is the right side, so I'm going to put right sides together. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip it round to the other side, so I'm working with the neckband underneath. So that's my stitch line on this side where the stitch is, and then the marking there is where it is on the neckband. So I'm just going to put a pin in that bit and try and keep that then secure. So if that bit was like that, that'd stay in there, and then put the pin in. Put the pin in there, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to rotate one side round. Now I'm going to try not to stretch it, overstretch it or anything like that. So if you do pull it round, just push it back in slightly, and then just let that ease then come out. Because the whole point of this material here, because you're going to stitch to a point, that shouldn't get in the way. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pin following the stitch line so that I can turn it round in a second and check it before I stitch. So here goes. So same then on the other side. So I'm trying not to overstretch it. So that should look like that.
Mummy,
So we'll see. So that's pinned on the stitch line on the wrong side. So I'm gonna rotate it round, turn it back round to the right way. I'm taking the anchor pin out, the first pin. So I think when that's stitched, it's all lined up, and I'll be happy with that. So I'm gonna go on to stitch it. So I'm going to stitch it and then I'll come back and I'll see what it looks like. I might tack it in first with a machine tacking stitch just so I can really double check. So I've tacked it in place with a machine tacking stitch. So that's the right side and then the wrong side. So it's just a big tacking stitch and then that's the seam underneath. So that's underneath. Let me just let the camera focus. So that's underneath. So wrong side but underneath the seam allowance. And then that's the wrong side with the band sitting down. Just caught it there. And then the right side. So I'm happy now to go ahead and stitch this with a normal stitch and apply the rest of the band on. So I'll do that now. So this is the neckband sewn in to the point. If you want a sample, I would probably just go back and go over this bit because it looks like it's coming away. So that's the right side. It's not been pressed. So that's the right side. And then if I turn it round, I can show you the inside. So that is the band. I used a 2.5 centimeter seam allowance. My seams were left open on the shoulder. And what I might do now is just do a top stitch. Okay. So usually I wouldn't change my foot, but because obviously I'm doing a tutorial, I've got to. So I'm using a top stitching foot for my Bernina. And if you can see, there's like a plate there that goes into the seam allowance. And then you can move your needle so that it can stitch. So there's my needle going in. And I'm going to top stitch on the main side of the fabric, not on the collar. So I'm going to start off. I don't know how well this will go with me holding the foam. So as you can see, everything stays in line. A quick look at the back. So that looks very nice. So I'm going to carry on and then I'll show you at the end. It's maybe really hard to see, but what is happening is I'm pulling the material at the same time. Not pulling, but keeping taut the material so that it doesn't bulk up. So there you have it. You got your top stitch and your neckband applied. Ta-da! Beautiful.